Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 614, Head in a Can of Paint. Monday, November 23rd, 2020. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. What is the future of TV news? With the elections over and the shift to digital accelerating, many experts are predicting disaster. But one analyst is suggesting the chance for a more positive outcome. What is it? Tonight we'll discuss. Also unpacking the impact of Google's banking moves, YouTube dabbles in audio ads, learning from the mom airlines stump, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the Vice President of Sales at IWCO Direct, Mr. Ted Aurelius. Ted, you're finally back on the program.
Thanks for having me, Bob. I feel like I've been gone for a long, long time, but I'm really glad to be back.
I'm just glad I got you on the program finally.
Thanks.
Now, also with us, one of the pioneers of social media marketing strategy, writer, speaker, podcaster, and consultant, Mr. Scott Monty. Scott, what's happening?
Hello, Bob. I can't remember the last time I was here, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'll hopefully make a slow exit.
I don't know what that means, but hopefully it doesn't mean something bad. Now, next, he's Vice President, Analyst, and Gartner Fellow covering customer experience. Say hello to Mr. Augie Ray. Augie, hi, how are you?
I am doing as well as can be expected, and thank you for having me back, Bob.
Yeah, you're welcome. And finally, we welcome back the Chair of the Management and Marketing Department at Oakland University. Dr. Janell Townsend is here. Hi, Janell.
Hi there. Thanks for having me back again. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. Well, we've got a big topic to cover right off the bat. In the aftermath of a huge election-fueled boost of news network ad revenue comes the reckoning of what the future now holds. TV's slide is accelerated during the pandemic. News viewership is projected to fall off a cliff now that we don't have this constant attention to the election, although the election is kind of continuing, so it's helping them out a little bit. And the entire breaking news model is seriously under threat from the social networks that break and spread news faster and more efficiently. Now, many are predicting disaster, but analyst and NYU professor Scott Galloway proposes in his most recent letter a whole new model of television news, which is, incidentally, the same model that he says has been working for print media. And it comes down to subscription and digitalization. Possibly even an acquisition of a marquee news network by one of the tech giants to go along with it. So, Augie, Galloway's proposal is based on his own experience on the board of the New York Times. Does this model truly translate to television? Did you get a chance to read his whole letter and maybe have a few comments about it?
Yeah. Well, Scott's always an interesting guy. I love the dialogues that he starts. And I certainly appreciate his strong commitment to the importance of the news media in our world. But I do think there are some problems when Scott says that CNN can do the same thing that the New York Times is. And I think there are two reasons that this is problematic. The first is one of a question of brand, and the second is one of supply and demand. And so when you think about the New York Times, you can put words after the New York Times and it means something, right? New York Times bestseller, New York Times opinion, New York Times style, New York Times magazine. That's because the New York Times has a brand. You can't do that with CNN. In fact, the New York Times crossword is such a powerful brand on its own that it is a separate digital subscription for the Times. And so when I read what Scott had to say, he talks about CNN having these popular personalities, people like Anderson Cooper and Christine Amanpour, but they can leave. We've seen that happen, of course. And so CNN's brand seems to me to be wrapped up with individuals where the New York Times had a brand. People wanted to subscribe to it, and it was special, which sort of brings me to the second issue, which is supply and demand. And there are very few newspapers that are making, or digital publishers that are really making subscription work. The New York Times is a standout exception. It has around 6 million subscribers, but there are only 5 other digital news publishing services that have 1 million, and just another 5 that have 500,000. And so I did a little research on this and went over to YouTube and found that there's a YouTube channel run by an 8-year-old that has 24 million subscribers and earned $26 million. So,
Yeah.
I think it puts it in perspective. Now, to be clear, YouTube channels face the same supply and demand problems that newspapers do, right? For every New York Times making digital subscriptions work, there are hundreds of newspapers that are failing at it, and God knows, for every Ryan Kaji making 26 million on YouTube, there are a million other that are just making a few bucks. But the difference is that YouTubers can produce their content for like nothing, right? It takes nothing but their creativity, their time, cheap or free digital tools, and voila, you've got a YouTube channel. But obviously the same is not true for the news. And so to me, this is still an issue of supply and demand. If your content is not unique and if it is easily replaceable, then all that putting a paywall up does is keeps people out rather than producing revenue at the gate. So I don't see the same opportunities for the CNNs of the world, no.
Aren't we being a little bit myopic, though? I mean, and I admit I'm very skeptical that this would work as well. I mean, the idea of CNN somehow becoming as digital and as profitable as the New York Times is doing with their subscription model, it just seems crazy. Not to mention the fact that, I mean, CNN is a cable network, so it's kind of a subscription already. It may not be a direct subscription, but you kind of already feel like you're paying for it to begin with when you have it on cable. So, but I'm just wondering, are we not thinking through the possibilities of what TV news can become, as opposed to just relying on his off-the-cuff ideas and about what they can do to monetize themselves? I mean, there's so many opportunities that we're maybe not even envisioning when you're talking about a news organization as complex as CNN. Could they not figure out a way to make subscriptions pay in a similar way that the New York Times is doing? I mean, anybody?
Maybe eventually, but the thing is, I think it's a chicken and egg question. Who would pay for something that you can get on Twitter and YouTube for free now? And the thing is, you can't get New York Times opinions for free, right? You can't get the New York Times bestsellers list. You can't get New York Times arts for free. And so, is it conceivable? Sure. I don't see that many TV networks, and I'll shut up and let everyone else get a word in edgewise. I just don't see enough TV networks doing something that is so unique and different and in demand that they could afford to go that same route.
Janell, what are your thoughts on this? I'd love to get you in on this conversation, because there are ways to put certain elements, like you could sub-brand a whole bunch of the stuff that CNN does and turn it into revenue streams to complement the free content that's already available. I mean, that's similar to what the New York Times is doing, but they can do it with an interesting spin that's unique to a TV network and bring more video assets into play. I mean, it seems like it could be done, but again, I'm skeptical, but what are your thoughts?
I would say I'm probably closer to the skeptical camp, but I do think that we are already paying for CNN in your cable subscriptions or some sort of subscription. If you want to watch live streaming of CNN, you have to sign in through some form of TV provider. Even if you're watching it online, you can only watch so much before they'll cut you off, or I think it's about 10 or 15 minutes. That's free. So there is some, monetization happening from a subscriber perspective already. I think what's really being talked about here, and is sort of interesting, is this potential for changing brand portfolio or the products that are in their portfolio. Because, something like the New York Times crossword puzzle, you could conceivably have a CNN crossword puzzle. Would people buy it? I don't know, but you could do that. There's certainly other types of products that they could offer within this portfolio. So, is it completely unrealistic? No, but I think it would require substantial investment and probably a change in mindset to brand management for the news companies to be able to make that pivot.
That's an interesting part of this, because Scott brings up the idea that, not Scott Monty, but we're going to go to you next, Scott, anyway. But Scott Galloway brings up the idea of one of the big tech companies like Twitter buying CNN and making it part of their network. Scott, does that make sense to you? Is that some way that this kind of takes on new legs and putting that kind of investment behind CNN, putting that kind of mindset and putting that kind of energy into the mix?
Well, it might, but I don't know that if you've got this shrinking infrastructure around cable subscriptions and, standard cable news, and you've got a limited, pretty niche social network, that combining the two is going to actually get you anything larger. If anything, it becomes an even more cut up piece of the pie. It doesn't feel like it's an expansion. It feels like it's a reversion of the direction of the evolution. And furthermore, I think Twitter is already rife with so many journalists, so many news personalities. And, I'm kind of a news junkie, so I follow a lot of them already. I don't know that mainstream America is really as invested in Twitter as they are in CNN. I think the familiarity isn't there. I don't think people understand how to use it as well.
Okay, so maybe not Twitter, but maybe Facebook, maybe Google. Do any of these other players make a good match?
Please, let's not give any more power to Facebook to control the news media.
I'm not recommending it or anything. I'm just saying it's out there.
Here's the thing. Augie made a very good point with regard to New York Times as a brand, and how anything that comes after New York Times is automatically respected. New York Times crossword, as we've said, New York Times bestseller. What have we got? CNN fake news, right? they don't have that level of credibility, at least within half of the population. They don't have that level of everything fit to print that the New York Times has had for centuries.
Oh, but wait, New York Times is fake news too, according to certain people.
But here's the thing. I agree. But here's the thing. New York Times, with respect to the last 4 years in particular, has grown its digital subscription base and really its overall revenue pretty remarkably. It's been a place where people have gone to and have known they can go when they're looking for something that's more definitive. Okay? And to me, that's been an issue that I think needed to be addressed by all the media companies in the last 6 months, was to say, how can we work together in pursuit of the truth? Because there was, you may have heard, Bob, there was an article that was up, I don't know, maybe last quarter or so, that the truth is paywalled and the garbage is free. Basically.
I did not hear that, but that's a really insightful comment. It's really true.
Well, I'll see if I can find that article, because I referenced it in my newsletter at one point.
Wait, Bob, how much do you charge for this?
But
I don't charge nearly enough, let me tell you.
But the thing is, if all of the news networks turn to each other and say, we are going to make all coverage related to the election free, just like they've been doing with coronavirus coverage, that would be a service to society that could eventually gain them additional subscribers for their other content. And people can see what kind of trusted information is being put out there. So, take CNN, take, whatever network, combine them with whatever tech company, which also has reputational problems, and see if you can kind of create this freemium model together in times of crisis to lead to better trust?
I'd love to explore if there is anybody that you have in mind, any company that you have in mind that would make a good partner for an MSNBC or a CNN or even a Fox News. I mean, it's just like, is there any digital platform that could take advantage of any of their assets and turn them into a much more digitally oriented play that is both TV network and also streaming service and also brand extensions across the board? Is there any partner out there, any perfect pairing? Ted, I haven't heard from you. Maybe you could weigh in and offer a thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a perfect pairing. Scott mentions a couple of them, obviously, in the article. A couple things I wanted to point out. With the New York Times going, to the digital platform, their customers were already used to paying for a subscription, right? So all they were doing was changing the channel, not necessarily their behavior. CNN, and the other point I wanted to make was, yes, New York Times is a great brand, right? It doesn't matter who is behind the curtain, as long as the curtain says New York Times, whereas CNN, which was brought up earlier, the brand is built on those personalities. So if they leave, then that changes the brand of who CNN is. And I think I don't think it's going to be difficult for people to get into that mindset of paying for that privilege of watching CNN when they can get that news someplace else. It was just mentioned that Twitter, a lot of journalists are on Twitter. And, as Scott pointed out in his article, well, that might be the fit, Twitter and CNN. I just don't see that working.
Maybe somebody like Google, and I hate to suggest it. I mean, Google, almost like Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, doesn't necessarily need to control more. But Google has the opportunity, of course, to monetize things really effectively with advertising. I'm still kind of dubious, though. Ultimately, I mentioned supply and demand. Newspapers, there are simply too many of them, right? And where newspapers can survive, they've got to be unique, which means local, right? The hyper-local focus. But how many newspapers do we need covering national news? I mean, for 30 years, I always loved watching the Super Bowl and mocking that there's an entire section with 5,000 journalists. They're all watching the same game. How many people do we need to cover that game? Obviously, that's more PR boondoggle than anything else. But at the end of the day, I mean, it makes the point that you just only need so many sources of national news. And as the number of sources come down, then there'll be an opportunity to raise some paywalls. But right now, if CNN goes away, I just can't imagine people don't shrug and go to one of the other 4 or 5 or 6 or 50 places they can get free news right now online. So
there doesn't seem to be.
I don't see it.
There doesn't seem to be a good pathway towards success for news in a general sense. What I mean by that is, I was trying to pose a question about whether or not text translates into other medias better than taking video and translating that into other medias. Meaning, like, the New York Times had the advantage of this great reputation and all these assets, and it was all text-based, and then they started adding video and audio and other types of content to expand their portfolio and move into new areas. I mean, same with networks like Vox, or even like Axios. I mean, this week BuzzFeed just acquired HuffPost. I mean,
Did CNN already do that though in reverse? I mean, CNN started as nothing but video, and now I have a sneaky suspicion of far more people consume CNN via text than video, I would guess.
Do you really think that's the case? I mean, I would think that they'd be still trading in video more often. I mean, obviously you can go to the CNN website and read the news, but they're always put in there with video assets, and it's expected to be free. So it's kind of like defeating the purpose. I mean, what they need, I mean, their TV networks are at the same point as the newspapers were prior to, or the websites, the web news services were at, where they were giving their content away for free, and they needed to put some kind of subscription model into place to kind of gate that content. And everybody said it wouldn't work, and it's still not working perfectly, but people are getting, more and more comfortable day by day paying for subscriptions to get their news online. I'm just wondering if it's easier to make that leap from being a text-oriented content provider into other types of content when you're trying to build a subscription model, as opposed to the other way around, being a TV network that you already feel like you're paying for with your cable subscription, and suddenly now you want to also be paying for them online. I mean, that makes no sense. So I'm just wondering if they have a tougher row to hoe, as they say.
Well, they might, because they, as we've said before, what they're offering is basically pretty similar to what many other cable news outlets offer. The difference is the personalities. What the New York Times gets right is the bundling of not only personalities, but entire sections and functions and features. It really requires, if CNN is going to do this, it almost reminds me of the situation that Amazon and Walmart find each other in, that, competing to kind of race to the middle, where Walmart is trying to get more adept at e-commerce, and Amazon is trying to get better at brick and mortar. Walmart has the advantage of actually having a footprint of some 4,000 stores or whatever the number is across the country. Amazon has the head start in terms of its algorithms and its logistics and everything else. I think it's a different way of looking at the same kind of issue. And the question to me would be, could a CNN and maybe another news network and a couple of tech companies come together and bundle something together to give people an experience that they can't get anywhere else? That, to me, would answer the problem.
And there's no way to figure that out on a podcast with just four of us kind of spitballing, but it is an interesting dilemma, and it's one that we're going to have to watch as they kind of rakes through the world over the next few years. We'll see what happens. Well, I wanted to talk next about Google. Google has announced a slew of changes to GPay and Android Pay, as well as the launch of Plex. I can't believe another Plex. I mean, we've got a Plex in Michigan. We've got a Plex in California already. There are two different services. Now there's a third Plex that has nothing to do with the other two. But the launch of Plex, their mobile-first banking platform, and other financial services, they claim, of course, that they will never sell your financial data to advertisers. But as some of our source articles pointed out, the road is pretty much littered with Google's broken promises on this point. So, Janell, if applying financial data against ad targeting is the theoretical endgame, which is always the theoretical endgame when it comes to Google, what would this do for marketers? I mean, having people's financial data tied to your ad targeting, that would be pretty sweet, if not a little dangerous, right?
It's already been done.
Yeah, I know.
It's already part of the way the world works, and has been for quite some time. The credit card companies already sell our data, basically. It's done through a process called tokenization, and it has to do with the processing of the cards and the payments themselves. So there's a law from 1999. It's the GLB, Graham-Leach-Bliley, I think it's called, Act, that says that financial institutions can face penalties if they put any of their customer data at risk. And so the way that they've gotten around this is through this tokenization process that happens whenever there's any type of digital processing. So theoretically, everything is made anonymous, and then you can't figure out who it is. But in reality, what happens is that batch data can then be repieced together to identify pretty closely who people are, if not exactly. And I had heard about this probably about 10 years ago from one of my students in Europe. And yeah, at the time I was like, this is kind of a scary thought. And over the years, I've watched how there's definitely been some things happening that indicate that this is definitely true. And why would it not be with all the other things that go on right now as far as our privacy is concerned? We have very limited walls to our privacy. So I don't think that it's any big leap to expect that Google will eventually somehow monetize this data, because that's what Google is. It's a data monetization company.
So you would say that it's not making the problem any worse by having Google getting into this space. It's just a reality of our times. I mean, because even now that you bring it up, I mean, I know this. I mean, I've been in direct marketing. I know about tokenization and the way that we target our email blasts or put out a regular mail blast. There's always that implication that your financial data is being used to help target that solicitation. But I'm wondering, is it any more nefarious with Google doing it, considering, the fact that they know so much else about you, and they may not be completely transparent about what they do know about you?
Well, are any of the companies completely transparent about it?
No.
Realistically. It's like when Mark Zuckerberg said years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was now, but he had made a speech where he said that there is no such thing as privacy, and everybody went crazy and said, what do you mean there's no privacy? But the reality is there's very little privacy anymore. Google getting in on it, to me, it doesn't make me happy, because I do feel like they have too much information about me already personally as a consumer. From a management perspective, it certainly gives us another bit of data to be able to, further micro-target people. So there's, some potential benefit there. Now, the blowback, I suspect, will be large initially, as it is oftentimes when Google reneges on one of these promises, right? But then it sort of fades away. They're like, just is what it is, and seem to get used to it.
Yeah, it's always
question.
Right.
I question though if there'd be much blowback. Blowback always happens in the media, and it certainly happens among pundits and podcasts like this. We talk about privacy a lot on here, but I'm not sure people care that much. Like, I don't see people availing themselves of the tools they have. If anything, Google tends to provide more transparency, I think, and more control than a lot of the companies out there. I mean, I don't know what my credit card company is doing with my data, or the point of sale system, or my bank. Google, I've got some ideas, but I certainly wouldn't claim to have perfect knowledge. But ultimately, I think so many people have embraced this idea that privacy is dead that I question if there'd be any sort of real backlash, except a couple of sternly worded arguments in the media, and most consumers will shrug and go, oh, look, isn't this nice how Plex ties together my Gmail and my credit card information in one place? This is really useful.
Oh, I agree with you. That's pretty much what I was saying, is that there'll be some blowback for a minute or two, and then it'll be over, and things will just go on.
Yeah.
Apple's been really at the forefront right now. I mean, probably largely to cover their own butts, considering the fact that all big tech is under the microscope of regulation right now. But, I mean, Apple's been making a big case about making your data your own, securing your data, being a player in the space of not selling your data to advertisers, and making sure that other people can't sell your data if you're using one of their phone products or one of their tablet products or one of their computers. So, I mean, are they just alone in the world trying to preach a better ethics for managing the use of data in targeting of advertising? And if so, will it have any impact on consumers? Is it raising the awareness right now of what consumers face if they don't protect their own data? Or is it just kind of noise in the wind, and it's just causing a lot of headaches for people like the Facebooks of the world?
Well, I think it comes down to leadership and the approach that each of these teams of executives have taken. When it comes to Facebook, Zuckerberg has always had a cavalier attitude about privacy. And we saw that back to the text messaging from his Harvard dorm room, when he was saying that people trust him, quote unquote. Um, Google, I think, even though they have command over so much of our information, has shown a more responsible approach. I mean, you look at the congressional testimony of Sundar Pichai in front of Congress. He takes a responsible approach, and Tim Apple. Tim Cook does an even better job. You know, Apple is there as if to say, "Hey, we're the adults in the room. We fundamentally understand privacy, and we respect your privacy." Now, that doesn't mean Apple isn't doing all sorts of things with data, but you just get the feeling from them that they're more responsible with it. Now, your question, Bob, is it enough to actually make people lift up their head and switch from one service to the other, or to cut off certain things that they're doing? I don't think so. I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. Barring some sort of, massive data breach or, crumbling infrastructure in tech, I don't think we're ever going to see that. People aren't even concerned enough to understand the truth about what's going on with the election and all the garbage that's come out in the last 2 weeks, for example. Why are they going to concern themselves with something as complex and nuanced as privacy issues?
I feel like I ask this question every single week, Ted. I mean, it's just like you and I, we're both, dyed-in-the-wool direct marketers from way back. Shouldn't there be some kind of ethical approach from marketers at some point? I mean, your competitor may be using all this data and knows too much about the customer and is running fast and loose with that data. And they may get an advantage on you in the short term, but is it better in the long term for us to establish and hold to a higher ethics standard when it comes to targeting of customers? And maybe we just need to... Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Farrah Bostic's statement here on the show. It's just like every doctor and lawyer has to go through an ethics evaluation and periodically re-up their ethics understanding for their profession. But advertising doesn't. We don't have anything similar like that. Do we need something like that?
I think, to your point, I do. The short answer is yes. I do think that we should have some sort of formal standardization of what we're trying to do and how we handle data. And I think there is some of that. I also think that as a direct marketer, I have a responsibility to guard and protect my clients' data as if it were my own. And I just like, there are bad doctors and lawyers out there. There are bad direct marketers out there that take advantage. So I think, like I said, I agree with you. And I do want to make a point about Apple. Agreed with the earlier statement of Mr. Cook exudes that, right? It's like you feel safe when he tells you something. And it comes out in their products, right? So it's, the thumb print that's only yours that starts your phone, or now it's face recognition. Those are things that are that they've kind of embraced, and people feel safer with those. And to the points made earlier, I just don't think people care enough. Like there was that big, data scare, 10 years ago, and there's data breaches and this and that, but it blows over and people go on with their daily lives and try to feel as safe as possible with what they have.
Well, don't you think that that's why, Apple has used that clearly as a brand attribute, and that's one of the reasons they're able to have a price premium in the market over other players?
100%.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if privacy is what people think. It'd be interesting. It's an interesting thought, and you're probably right. It draws people who might be a little more worried about privacy. But they get a price premium because they've got beautifully designed products and they're easy and it's well integrated. And to me, privacy's 10th or 11th on that list for the price premium, in my perception.
That's probably true, but I think it's a sum total, right?
Yeah.
There's probably some additional impact. What that is, I suspect they've probably measured
Well, what's
in some
interesting
way.
about it, though, is that what it does is it suggests that Tim Cook and everyone at Apple has a more cohesive view of what a beautifully designed product is, and it's not just in the interface; it's also in privacy, right? I mean, maybe I've sort of missed the mark in not seeing privacy as an element of that beautiful design rather than something separate from it.
I want to continue this conversation about.
What is interesting
Oh,
is
go
that,
ahead.
well, I was just going to say, what is interesting is that Apple was able to get Goldman Sachs to not monetize any of the customer data with their Apple Card, their new credit card. However, MasterCard is their processor, and they were not able to get those same concessions from MasterCard. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's not perfect. I mean, I never feel completely safe with Apple. I mean, it's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's just that anybody who has that much of my data, it's concerning. But they do a better job than most of the other big tech players, and that really does figure into at least my own assessment of which phone I want to use. But that's neither here nor there. The focus group of one never works. But I did want to continue this conversation about Google and move on to YouTube here. YouTube has recognized the reality that many of us are tuning into the platform not to watch videos, but to listen to the content, whether it's audio music or audio podcasts. We're tuning in for lots of reasons that are not necessarily video-based. And in response, they're now offering advertisers audio-only ads. Scott, what does this do for the platform and for us as advertisers? Does it help us? Is it a good idea? What are your thoughts?
Well, overall, I mean, I think it's a continuing indication that YouTube is interested in the audio, specifically the music business. Watching what's happened with Pandora, Spotify, Apple Music, and others, and this is one foray into it. This is a way we're seeing them in, because let's face it, who among us has time to just sit and stare at a video during a busy day? We're already up to our earballs in Zoom calls, and our faces are ready to fall off. That maybe if you put a video on and you were doing something else and you could listen to what was going on, it might make sense. But advertisers right now aren't making audio-based ads for videos. They're making very visual ads. So when someone isn't paying attention to the screen, they're not necessarily getting the full impact of the ad. I think what YouTube is doing here is embracing the reality that people are busy. They're not always staring at the screen. And by the way, if you subscribe to YouTube Music, it allows you to continue streaming those videos when you're doing other things as well, which in turn would increase the likelihood that people are going to hear these ads.
But is this an argument? Is this an argument truly for audio advertising as opposed to a rethinking of how you do your advertising for video? I mean, if you're doing a YouTube ad campaign, what this says to me is you just need to add more audio only elements to your video ad and make it so that the ad works both in an audio sense and in a video sense. It doesn't make any sense to me to buy an audio-only ad on a platform that also has video.
I don't know. The only thing people are looking at is the skip button anyways, right?
Yeah. Another Farabostic quote. It's just like you can count the effectiveness of a YouTube ad by the little countdown clock in the right bottom corner. But yeah, I mean, it seems so ludicrous to me that you would buy an audio-only ad on the platform when it could be you could rework your video ad to be working in both senses. Am I wrong about that? Anybody want to disagree?
Well, the cost to produce audio would be a lot less. So if you're going to do something unique, plus, I mean, I guess it depends on how you're targeting, right? It always comes back to targeting. If you're targeting an ad toward music listeners, then a good audio ad can run on Spotify. It can also run now on YouTube, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Janell, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, there are, significant number of things on YouTube that are audio only. So especially if you look for any type of music, a
Mhm.
lot of times it will come up as, if you're looking for the video, expecting that to be there, it'll come up as just a screen, or sometimes a screen with lyrics on it with the music
I know
playing.
this. I know this from my own experience because I put my podcast on YouTube every single week, and it won't let you upload just audio content. You need to put some kind of static image or screen that lasts the entire length of the audio, or else it kicks it out as being audio only content. Which again
I
seems
see.
ludicrous to me that they wouldn't, if they want the audio, why are they putting those restrictions on the platform? It doesn't make any sense. I'm just wondering if they've thought through this issue. Ted, what are your thoughts? Anything you would add to this?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure what kind of sense it makes. I don't, I'm a Spotify user when I work out. And so the ads to me are just an opportunity for me to change the weights. So I just don't, um, I'm not sure I get it. And I don't think if I was, if I was to spend money as an advertiser, this would not be one of my top five options. I think there are better places to do that. But again, the comment was made earlier. It all depends on what your message is and who you're trying to target. I mean, that's true with any medium. But in this particular case, I'm not sure what they're trying to accomplish here.
Could this be less about YouTube and more about Google Music? I've been noticing that I'm getting a lot more ads on YouTube for Google Music recently. And so could this presage a push for Google to push its music service a lot harder than maybe it has?
Well, it's not Google Music as much as YouTube Music. YouTube is very specifically making a push to get where Spotify and Apple are, and is asking people to subscribe. And 60% of listens to YouTube Music happens on mobile. And if you've tried to keep YouTube going or to multitask on your phone while you're doing something else, I mean, it shuts down YouTube unless you are a paying subscriber, right? So I think this is very clearly a push to move more people into YouTube Music or YouTube, paid subscriptions, where YouTube will be able to guarantee advertisers more ears. It's as simple as that, I think.
Yeah, and I also think that as part of that, I also think it's opening up the door to bring the music industry back into the fold, to try to provide them with another money source, right? To be able to say, hey, look at what we've done, look how many subscriptions we have, and it's an opportunity again for them to monetize that.
Yeah, particularly when musicians aren't able to tour or do live events at the same scale they have been in years past.
Right.
Tangentially, YouTube has also made a move to place ads on all content. That was another item that was in this past week's news. Whether you're a partner or not, whether or not you agree to have advertising or not, they're going to be putting advertising on your content and you just won't get paid for it. So it's kind of like puts a huge use case for why you should always sign up for one of these accounts with Google. But that aside, I mean, are ads going to be more, or are they going to be less effective in such a saturated environment anyway? Which begs the case, does having an audio ad make any sense given such a saturated ad market where there's more interruptions going on all over the place on the platform?
Well, I think if people are multitasking, and if that is part of the drive behind this, they may be less likely to stop, interrupt themselves from what they're doing, switch over to whatever screen they need to be on to fast forward through the apps. It may be a way to artificially juice that.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, I joke a lot about, we all do, about the skip button, but if you're watching a YouTube ad, you are focused on the skip button. I mean, it gets pushed within 1 second of it going to skip. But if you're listening to music, your hands might be full, you're working in the kitchen, you're not paying attention to the screen. There might be something really smart going on here.
Yeah, that's a really insightful thought right there, what you guys just brought up. Well, we've got to move on to the last topic. We're running out of time. An artist from Iceland launched an entire fake airline over the last few weeks. He took hundreds of pre-bookings, fielded hundreds of customer service requests, and even after he came clean that it was all just an artistic statement on the travel industry, people continue to ask him if he'll really start the proposed enterprise. I mean, Ted, experts have weighed in on what works and what doesn't with this proposal. I mean, people have spent a lot of ink or digital ink on trying to figure out whether this was a good idea, bad idea, what worked, what didn't work. But what made this idea resonate so powerfully with its audience? I mean, what were the key factors about this that made people think this is the best airlines that has ever been launched?
First and foremost, I think it was the fact that we are in the midst of a pandemic and people were just longing to travel and wanting to believe that travel was possible again. Secondly, I think that people have always been drawn to the low budget airlines for whatever reason. When I say people, I'm talking about the occasional travelers, not the business travelers who fly every week. So I think the Southwest Airlines and all of the other smaller budget airlines were people are always interested in what the next thing is going to be. And he came up with the idea of those free tickets, right? It's the free ticket on every free tickets on every flight. He came up with all of the added extras, including toilet paper and life jackets and parachutes. It's illegal, I believe. So I think this was, it was an interesting stunt. Some of the ideas that he came up with, again, I think those budget airlines are going to take a look at those. But again, for the people who travel all the time, a lot of those things, the model of a la carte for just about everything doesn't really fit in with the business traveler. But like I said, I mean, there are some things in there that I think people took notice and took away from as ideas that could be used elsewhere.
Did anybody else get that feeling too? I mean, did anybody else see any of the particular offers that they were spinning out for this airline? Do you see any of them teaching the airline industry a thing or two? Like one of the most interesting ideas that I felt was in there was this idea of, we'll give you a free flight, like Ted mentioned, but we're not going to give you a flight back. You got to pay for it anyway. So it's kind of like, of course they're going to give you a free flight because you're going to have to pay to get back. And that, from a marketing standpoint, it's just shy of being brilliant when you think about the economics of the airline industry.
Until I use a free flight on a different airline to get back.
Yeah, true. But I'm just saying, it's just like, it's a pretty interesting idea, I mean, it's just like, not everybody has a free flight. Not everybody travels as much as you do.
I worked in the travel business for one relatively difficult year. And I really did spend a year trying to understand the Byzantine workings of the travel industry. It looks so simple from the outside. It really isn't on the inside. And so I have a sneaky suspicion that the travel business doesn't need to look at fictional airlines for ideas. They're struggling with a monumental level of complexity as it is. If you don't mind, Bob, there was something, though, that struck me about this, which was bigger than what the travel industry could learn, which is, in some respects, I think we could tie this together with almost all the other topics we discussed. People will buy from a fictional airline because it's so easy nowadays to make it look real. They'll get their news from dubious sources because, anyone can become a news source. They'll download the latest fintech app, right? Because it promises to make them millionaires, and they'll never understand the privacy or the financial risks. And I've long had this feeling that we all think that we are internet savvy nowadays. In fact, you don't hear much talk about digital natives anymore because everyone supposedly is so internet savvy. And yet, we've had this enormous revolution in the way we do everything, conduct business, get information, deal with each other in just the last 25 years, which is a blink of an eye on a human scale. And I just wonder if what's interesting about this isn't what can an airline learn, but more about what it says that in this era with Kickstarter and Robinhood and Twitter and Bitcoin and WordPress, that anyone can look like they are anything right now. And so often people are buying into that. And I just wonder if there is a larger message here about, I don't know, about oversight, about regulation, about the way we have to bring a more dubious and careful approach to the things that we do. Because the thing that concerned me here wasn't, hey, 2 free flights is an interesting idea. It was, how does somebody with very little money start something that looks so much like a real airline that they could start getting bookings? And what does that say about protecting consumers and protecting our own interests in this era? To me, it's all sort of a reflection of all the risks that the internet has brought us and kind of how silly we all are to go racing into every new thing.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my first impression when I read this, was like, people really fall for anything. I mean, you can really make something look so real on the internet that people will fall for it, and it's so easy to do.
You wonder how many bookings they could have gotten if they called it Trump Airlines.
Well, it was in Ireland, so I'm not sure that would have worked over there, but that's beside the point. Well,
first flight to the Fire Festival.
Well, with
By
that,
the way, anyone listening should not go to momair.com like I did. It is a porn site. The real site is momair.ai or IA, something like that. Just be careful, everyone out there.
Yeah, don't go.
I just have to tell you guys a quick. Oh, sorry.
No,
I just want to tell you guys a quick story of years ago when a la carte pricing came in for airlines. I was taking a flight from England to Italy, and I was complaining to one of my friends in England about this, that it was kind of ridiculous that I had to buy all these pieces, and then I had to buy a seat, and I had to buy my bags. And so when I got to England, he promptly handed me some coupons and they were very professional looking coupons for using the toilet on this airline. And I thought it was real, so I actually tried to give them to the flight attendant. So that's it was quite funny, and they showed them around everyone, and it was a good guess. So.
Oh man, too much. Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug. Starting with Ted Aurelius. You can find him at iwco.com. That's the home of IWCO Direct, where he is a vice president. Tell us, Ted, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote?
What would I like to promote? Well, at IWCO Direct, we are a performance improvement agency. So any of you listeners out there who are having trouble sleeping at night because there are business objectives that you cannot achieve, we'd love to talk to you about a lot of the new things that we've got going on in the direct response space. So there is my shameless plug. Thank you, Bob.
And Ted has huge pedigree in this space. So if you want to talk to him, he knows his business. He knows direct marketing very, very well. Next up, Scott Monty. You can find him at scottmonty.com. That's the home of Scott Monty Strategies and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. Tell us what's going on in your world, Scott. What would you like to promote?
Oh, Bob, well, I'm just happy to be on the recovery slope from COVID. Thankful that it wasn't very severe. And I continue to write my newsletter, Timeless and Timely, which you can find not only through my own website, but also at timelesstimely.com. There's a new essay every Wednesday and then a bonus edition for paid subscribers every Friday. So check that out. And it's all about leadership and communication.
And if you like bow ties, definitely check him out on Instagram because he's doing a whole bunch of bow ties. It's pretty interesting. And if you like Sherlock Holmes, there's also that, but we won't get into that right now. Augie Ray, you can find him. It's blog.gartner.com, right? Is that where your blog sits?
Yeah, kind of hard to find us. Won't get into the machinations of our blog. Just search for Augie Ray on Google.
Okay. Well, definitely you can find Augie in all kinds of different places. But tell us what's going on in your world, Augie. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. The annual Gartner Marketing Symposium is going to be starting on December 1st in 9 days. It's our first one that we are doing online, like a lot of organizations. We have tracks for multi-channel marketing, for sales enablement, for lead and innovation, all sorts of things. We have a special track for CMOs. So I urge your listeners to maybe check it out. I think they would find it very interesting, particularly the keynote, which is going to be my interview with Bob Iger, the executive chairman of the Disney company.
Yeah, that looks really interesting. Yeah, I wish I could get in there, but I can't. I'm not a Gartner customer. Well, Janell Townsend, you can find her at oakland.edu. That's the home of Oakland University, where Dr. Townsend is the marketing chair, the management and marketing department chair, and doing all kinds of cool stuff. Tell us what's going on in your world, Janell. What would you like to promote?
I think I would just like to give a shout out to all the students, faculty, and staff at Oakland University for doing a great job through some very difficult times of trying to deliver a quality education. And, they're really just going to great lengths to be able to get an education in this COVID year that we're experiencing. And hopefully next year will be better. So, and the faculty have just done an outstanding job of really pivoting very quickly. And people don't realize the skill sets that are completely different from delivering an education in an online environment versus doing so in person.
Yeah.
There's
a lot of challenges to it. And I definitely applaud you for leading your department into this really difficult time for educators. So fantastic. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this show. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the fair. Janell, the PlayStation takeover of the London Underground signage, I fell in love with this. I don't know why. It's a simple takeover where they replace the iconic underground signs with the iconic elements of a PlayStation controller, the X, the triangle, the zero, the square. And I thought this was great fan service. It does nothing to brand this product to people who don't know the product, but to the people who do know the product, it was a signal that this launch was coming. I thought it was really quite effective. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely agree. And I think it probably created some word of mouth and awareness among people who aren't users of the brand, just because people would ask, well, what is that?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It was really very nice. I was a big fan of that when I saw it. Now, the fail of this week, man, Ted, I don't even know what to say here. Giant Food, which is a big grocery retailer in the middle part of this country. I'm not sure where exactly they are, but I know they're mainly in Maryland and Virginia, that type of area. But they advertised what they said was a super spread for the holidays, talking about their deli platters as spreads. I mean, who in the right mind could not see that a super spread was not the way to advertise this program in the heart of the pandemic? I mean, what do you think?
It's one of those things where you look at it and you just take a double take, and it's like, wait, what? Did I just read that correctly? Very poor editing on the part of their newsletter staff. It's just, it falls under the inexcusable, right? I mean, it's just so sensitive, so not sensitive.
I just heard in my head the conversation that happened, which was, hey, do you think we can run last year's Thanksgiving creative again? And somebody said, sure, why not?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably what happens.
Well, the foul of this week goes to Sherwin-Williams, who fired an associate over his paint mixing TikTok account. You know, Scott, just this last week's topic, we talked about the fact that brands were starting to use their employees' TikTok accounts and trying to leverage that kind of angle for, advantages within the company, getting employees to set up TikTok accounts or to leverage their existing TikTok accounts. What is Sherwin-Williams' problem here? I mean, it's just like this guy had a lot of followers and he was being nothing but complimentary to Sherwin-Williams throughout this whole process. Were they just not thinking?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. This has to be one of the dumbest moves I've ever seen. They were doing this marketing intern was doing nothing but giving them, free opportunities here, and with an audience that they normally wouldn't have reached, and doing it in a way that was fun. And I think what tipped me off is in part of the story, he tried to get in touch with a higher up brand or marketing manager to give them a presentation about why TikTok would be beneficial to Sherwin-Williams. And the response he got after weeks of silence was, "Oh, we don't have any promotions going on right now." Well, when you view this as a purely transactional play instead of a brand building exercise and one that can get you far ahead of the competition, well, then you've really got your head in the sand or in the the can of paint in this case. If I were or Benjamin Moore or Rust-Oleum, I would seek this guy out and hire him in a heartbeat.
There's a CMO somewhere at Sherwin-Williams who was feeling threatened. Somebody else generated an audience among the young Gen Xers that they've been trying to aim at, or the young millennials, whatever they're labeling it. And instead of seeing the opportunity, just saw the threat. It is. I just had to jump in because, much like you, Scott, obviously I've covered social media, and this would have been horrifying 8 years ago. It is just unbelievable in 2020.
Yeah, unbelievable is right. Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
Like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know. Like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.